Hi, my name is Italy, and in this video I'll be drawing a Flame Stalker dragon head from the game Day of Dragons. Now to start with, I've got some reference pictures to the side which I'll be using to learn what the basic shape of a Flame Stalker's head is, and I've got a circle here that I'll be trying to keep my drawing close to so that they can be used as an avatar or profile picture if I'd like to. Now the shape of the Flame Stalker's head is rather like a pie that has a little bit of extra cheek going on here. So you can see here it has got a very thin part to the front of the face where the nose points to a tip, and it has a very slopey top to the head and just this cheek point here as well. So it is a bit of a different shape to a lot of the other dragons, and you do have to keep in mind to make the cheek of the dragon large enough to accommodate all of its giant spikes or horns. So this is the kind of shape I want to try replicate when drawing my Flame Stalker. So I start off by drawing the top of the head, which is this sort of wedge or coffin shape with a very thin base. That goes into the nose of the dragon, and then the jawline of the dragon is quite straight and then goes up into the point of the cheek before divoting back in to meet the top of the head. Now I kind of imagine this shape of the Flame Stalker to be like a mask that attaches onto a sphere or a circle, which is kind of like a ball joint that are then attached to the neck of a dragon. So trying to visualize this as three-dimensional shapes. So yeah, this is the center of the sphere, and then you've got the neck coming out. The center point of the neck would come out from the center point of the sphere at the back of the head shape or mask shape that I've drawn here. Now we've got a rough shape of the dragon head. I'm going to start adding these details, like where the brow spikes go and under the eye spikes go. So you can see they sort of come a little bit above the line that's the top of the head, and they come very close to the mouth, and the eye is around the center point of the dragon's head, as you can see by the reference pictures to the right. Now I've made mine a little bit short, so I'm just going to lengthen this nose a little bit more, as I do want to make sure there is enough space for all those spikes, and so I've made some adjustments to this head shape. Now speaking of spikes, the spikes on the Flame Stalker's head actually all line up to the top three horns on the dragon. So you see the actual eye ridge spikes go into the largest of the horns, and then the next row up goes into the next horn, and the rows closest to the center of the head actually go into these horns that are sort of between the top horn and the large horn, but a bit further back on the dragon's head. Then you've also got the center spikes that go into the center spikes that run across the back of the dragon's neck. Now the Flame Stalker's nose is actually this cute diamond shape, which I actually super like about the Flame Stalker. Once I realized it had this shape, I made sure to always draw it, and for some reason I just really enjoy drawing that diamond shape on the nose of the Flame Stalker, and I think it really adds, like, it really helps it look like a Flame Stalker. So now I'm going to try draw out the lines to where these spikes are going. It's kind of difficult when it's such a rough sketch, so I do leave the actual drawing of the spikes till a bit later on, and I'm just sort of sketching out the flow or the line that would the spikes follow into the horns, and putting in things like the diamond on the nose and how the neck comes down on the bottom of from the bottom of the Flame Stalker's jaw. Now the Flame Stalker has these little sensory pits, these three little pits close to the nose, and they actually go in the same direction as the nostril holes go. I used to always do this wrong and put them the wrong way around, but I find it easy to remember now that I've realized that it is just the same the same sort of direction as the nostril holes. So you just follow that shape and just put the 3 lines around the same height as the nose, just a bit further back each time. Now I moved on to doing the eye of the Flame Stalker, and it does have this where there's I guess the bottom eyelid or some eye bags underneath the eye, and I do find adding this in does help your dragon look more realistic, and you'll see especially later on when I do the more detailed coloring, it definitely makes the eye area stand out a lot more than just drawing the eyes without defining those eyelids or the baggy area underneath the eyes. Next I do the eyebrow and cheek spikes, and you can see here they kind of go in an explosion shape, I guess, around the top of the ridge of the eye and at the bottom. And the bottom ones, they usually obscure the bottom of the mouth, so I do find it hard to make my Flame Stalkers have expressions when the bottom part of the mouth is hidden. So sometimes I will shift the bottom of that mouth just to be a bit lower so you can still see if the dragon is smiling or frowning or whatever. Now the males do have the chin spikes, the females don't, but just to show you how to do it, I'll draw the chin spikes on here, and you have the largest one at the front and then followed by some smaller ones to the back, and it is a V shape, so the big spike is in the center of the chin and then it spreads out in a V shape with the spikes either side running along the jaw of the bottom of the dragon. So there is actually 2 rows of spikes here, they're just on the very edges of the jaw on both sides of the dragon. Now I'm going to start detailing the horns, and there are 9 horns on the Flame Stalker. Starting with the one on the very top of the head, and then there's one a bit further back and behind the 3rd largest horn, and then we go down to a smaller one, an even smaller one at number 5, then we go large again at number 6, and then the 7th, 8th and 9th one are all changing to a smaller size. So it's a little bit complicated and can be a bit tricky fitting them all on the head, but I'll do my best to draw these out so it'll be easier for you to remember. So I'm going to start with number 1, which follows this row of spikes behind the behind the brow spikes. So we go along here with these spikes and then into the first horn. Number 2 is actually the row of spikes behind that, and they start quite far up the head, and it goes into a horn that is behind this first horn and further back on the head, and is quite often obscured by the 1st or the 3rd horn on the head. So it's not always easy to see, it is much easier to see from the other side. Number 3 follows the ridge, the eyebrow ridge spikes, and goes into the largest of the horns, and usually sits a bit further back on the head than most of the other horns, and can sometimes be obscured by horn number 4. I'm just adding in the horns on the other side too. So this is horn number 1, then horn number 2 sits further back and is more visible from this angle, and horn number 3, the larger horn, sort of sits in between these but is in front, so it will be behind the horns on the other side, if that makes sense. Now we'll be moving on to horn number 4. Now I just mentioned that these horns don't actually sit in a semicircle shape or follow the shape of the dragon's cheek or jawline. They actually sit in a sideways M shape, excluding the number 2 horn that sort of sits on its own, almost on the neck of the dragon, and is mostly hidden, as I mentioned before. But horn number 4 sits in almost the middle of the sideways M, and is quite a long way in from the cheek, and quite probably the closest to the eye of all the horns. Now, sometimes it's a bit of a struggle to line up all 9 of these horns, especially if you're making your dragon more stylized and maybe you've made the eye larger. You may find you're running out of room So a good way to sort of figure out where the horns should go is to do horn number 6, which sits on the very point of the cheek, and then put the other horns in either side of it so you know how much space you have to work with between the major points of the dragon, and you've still got them sitting in the right positions. So we've got horn number 4 and 5 at the top side of horn number 6, and then the bottom 3 all sort of follow the same direction, coming out from the bottom of the cheek and attaching to the jaw, and they are smaller than the top half of the horns, or more than half of the horns, with the middle of the 3 being a bit smaller than the top or bottom one. Now we have the horns in position. We've done what I consider to be the hardest part in drawing a Flame Stalker. I do really struggle with making sure I've got all 9 horns in position and that they don't feel too crowded. So we can move on to detailing. So adding in the little row of spikes just above the nose in the center, and just detailing this eye a little more, and the bottom chin spikes that just run across just above the mouth. Now I'm just going to add in the shape of the lip here. Now the Flame Stalker has this sort of upturned lip that sort of tapers here, so I want to make sure I get that shape in, as it does help characterize this dragon as a Flame Stalker. Then we curve down to the bottom of the chin, and it does divot up a little bit before reaching the cheek and coming back down again. And if you weren't going to have a male one, you would leave the chin spikes off at this point. And then we curve down for the throat of the dragon and into the neck of the dragon. And it does have this row of spikes that come out from the center point of the chin, so from horn number 6, and there's just a row of spikes that follows that. Then we're going to do the center spikes that run along the neck ridge of the dragon. Now the Flame Stalker has 3 sets of spikes that follow the ridge of the neck. The middle ones are the largest, and then on either side it has smaller spikes, and they're not centered in the same spot as the larger spikes. So you see they're sort of offset here on either side of the large spikes. So we're just going to draw those along the top here, and I will try draw the ones on the far side as well, as you can often see that if the dragon isn't completely flat on, you'll be able to see the tips of those smaller spikes on the other side of the larger ones. Now I've drawn this a little bit too big, so I'm just going to quickly resize this to better fit in my circle, which I'm supposed to be trying to keep within, but pretty much never do. That's okay, we can make this circle larger later if needed. Now Flame Stalker actually has 2 different textures of scales. It has these circular ones that sit on top of the neck and on the cheek and face, and then this sort of more leathery look underneath the middle row of spikes along its neck. It also has a sort of spiky surface around the edges of the cheek that leads into the horns of the dragon. Again, this helps characterize this as a Flame Stalker, so I do recommend trying to make sure that you have that leathery look underneath the neck or around the throat area, and defining some of these larger scales, particularly on the upper neck, the top half of the neck of the Flame Stalker. So now you've drawn yourself a Flame Stalker head, yay! But we're not quite done yet, there are a couple of other things I'd like to go through. I will be drawing a stylized version of this dragon a little bit later on, but first I just want to cover off the areas of the dragon that would be in shadow and which ones would be in light in a sort of very standard lighting scenario. Now, as with most dragons, the brow of the dragon usually casts a shadow over the eye, so I will normally start off with shading the eye area. Also, around the nose will be some shadow, especially around where the sensor pits are, and then along the bottom of the jaw and around the shape of the cheek to make it a more rounded shape. So we'll just add some sort of a mid-tone here to get an idea. The shadow is also being cast from the dragon's head, so we'll put the neck in shadow as well as running a shadow underneath each of the horns to make them look more cylindrical. Now the nose does dip in a tiny bit after that nose diamond, so I am going to add a bit of shading above that as well. I'm getting a slightly lighter color just to ease some of these transitions and add a bit of light back in underneath the throat. We also want to add a bit of light right underneath the eye, that's sort of where it raises up for the eyelid, and I want to brighten up the eye itself to make it pop out a bit more. Now we'll look at the light points of the dragon, and for this dragon it's clearly that nose diamond and this shape on the top of the head, as well as underneath the eye, following the shape of the mouth. So we're just going to add a bit of light here. I do also like to add a little bit of light at the very end of the mouth where it curves up into the smile. Just as with some dark colored dragons, it is difficult to see if they're smiling or not unless you highlight this area a bit. So you can see this is the base shading for this dragon, if it was under sort of a fairly standard light source. Now just going to push these values a little bit more and put a little bit darker of a color in some of the deeper recesses of the dragon, just to make the dark and light areas really pop. Now I'm done with showing you how to shade your dragon head. We're now going to look at stylizing the dragon. Now, I'm not going to draw a whole new sketch for this. I am actually just going to use what I've learnt from this more realistic sketch by turning the opacity down and drawing a very simplified shape over top. So we know where the horns are sitting. You can just do them as quick spikes coming out from the head, as long as you keep them in the same sort of area. And the spikes are just sort of this zigzag pattern along the top of the head. Now I've decided to go with this banana shaped eye, as I wanted it to look kind of cheeky, and because of that I am also going to push that smile a bit more, so have a bit more of a dip to make it look extra happy about whatever misdeeds it's doing. So yeah, it's quite spiky when it's stylized, but I think that looks kind of cool. And it's, once you know the shape of the dragon, this isn't too hard to do, but I do recommend learning how to draw the dragon properly before trying to do stylizing, as it does make it a lot easier to understand where to put certain things, especially when you start changing proportions, like the proportion of the eyes. It is sometimes a good idea to enlarge the eyes or exaggerate some of the features, especially if you plan on having it as a profile picture or an avatar, as at a smaller scale it is hard to see what kind of expression they're making unless you exaggerate some of these features. Now I am going to move on to colouring both this and the original sketch, so you can see what these look like coloured up. For this more stylized sketch, I do a sort of flat colouring. It's not super flat. I do actually do a lot of different colours for the flat colours themselves, but the Flame Stalker actually has quite a few base colours, that especially on its horns, to make it sort of look more like the dragon it is, I wanted to add a few more colors here. At the moment, I'm just trying to select the area around this sketch, but some of the lines aren't dark enough, so I'm just finding the lines that have betrayed me and darkening them up until my select tool selects just the outside of this dragon. Then I invert the selection and pull it in a tiny bit so it's a little bit in from the edge of the line. Make a new layer and paint bucket underneath that layer so that I don't have to paint around the shape of the dragon. Now, this kind of only works if you have drawn fairly solid lines. It won't work at all for my small sketchy picture because there's just too many lines that are not solid enough and not all the lines are to be kept. So I will be painting around the edge of that dragon when I come to that drawing. So you can see here I am adding quite a few different colors to the horns themselves. They do benefit from having this darker beginning and then going on to the brighter yellow. And then I just add a bit of character to this smoke. So just adding a bit of light orange there, as if there's some light coming from a fire source somewhere, somehow. For the shadow layer, this is just a multiply layer, which then I adjust to a lighter blue color, just to give it, just to define it as a shadow rather than just another color on the dragon. And I just add a bit of highlight here to the edges and finished with a bit of underlighting. I chose this weird pink color for the underlighting for some reason. Now I'm moving on to the original sketch, which is a more realistic sketch. I don't want to waste too much time on this, as if the videos are too long, nobody watches them. So it's going to be quite a quick, realistic-y sort of one, not as detailed as some of my other ones. People who watch my shadow scale one may see that I spent what looks like a bit more time on that dragon, but the shadow scales have like no horns. And detailing the horns on the Flame Stalker takes quite a bit of time, as you do have to make sure to add in these ridges or they end up looking a bit flat. Also, the top of its head's covered in spikes, and it has two different types of scale textures on its neck. So the Flame Stalker does take a lot more time to color and shade than the shadow scale does. So I did actually spend about the same amount of time on this as I did with the shadow scale version. It's just the shadow scale has a lot less work I have to do on it, so I was able to spend more time with making prettier light and dark areas and color variations on that dragon. So you can see here I am shading in grayscale. It is my preferred way to do things now. So I have changed the colors of this dragon into black and white, and I'm just painting over it with my bamboo brush. And the program I use is Artflow, by the way, if anybody wants to know. And I'm just detailing up these edges and smoothing some of these transitions in the grey, and then flicking on the colour every now and then just to make sure I'm still on the right track. As you can see with the eye, it does benefit from having this lighter ridge close to the eye, which is the eyelid of the dragon, and then a darker shadow directly underneath that before it hits the shape of the cheek coming out again. And I do think this adds a lot of character, and I really like how it turned out on this particular drawing. I continue on with these spikes. There are multiple layers to the horn spikes. They are ridged, so you do have to go over them quite a few times with light and dark, and quite harsh differences between the two because they are quite deep sort of ridges, and if you don't add these parts in, they just look like polished spikes instead of the ridgy horns that the Flame Stalkers have. And just trying to make sure I get in enough spikes on the top of the head without wasting too much time detailing them. Now I've started to add in some of these scale textures, so it has the circular sort of ones on the cheek and head, and just these longer ones around the mouth, and the back of the neck also has the circular ones. But as mentioned before, the throat or underside of the neck of the dragon has a more leathery look, so I just do these sort of lines across to shape sort of like a bunch of cylinders all squished together. I do a bit more detail in the eyes, just putting these little strokes in the eyes. It does help make them look more realistic. And then I turn back on the color layer and I start blending in some of these colors and making adjustments so it looks a bit better. Unfortunately, the reds don't work that great with my grayscale coloring, so there is a bit of work to get it to work properly. One of the things that I need to do is to shade the red with a color other than red or black, otherwise it looks rather flat, so I've shaded it with a bluey purple color. Then I've merged the color layer to my shading layer, and I've added again a weird pinky color underglow or reflected light for some reason. I don't know, it's just a color I chose and it looks alright, so yay. Then some final highlights here with white. And that's it. This is my two colored pictures, my very spiky stylized one, my more realistic one on the left. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to know about drawing these dragon heads. I do really enjoy making these videos and I hope they help. If you did enjoy this video, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe if you want to see more, and I do have a Patreon if you want to support me. Thanks again for watching and I'll see you all next time. Bye!